Solo hiking looks serene online. Empty trails, wide vistas, and the promise of self-discovery. But in the wild, there's no one to save you when things go wrong. In this video, we uncover 6 of the most terrifying solo hiking disasters. Proof that nature doesn't care if you're alone or in a crowd. It was May 19th, 2018, in the Mount Hood National Forest of Oregon. The air was mild, the sky clear, and the forest alive with spring growth. On the Hunchback Trail, hikers moved between shaded pines and open overlooks, enjoying one of the region's most popular routes. Yet beyond the marked path, predators still patrolled these woods, and one would not remain unseen for long. Claire Hounder, 34, lived in Salem and worked as a dental hygienist. Known for her steady manner with patients, she carried the stress of long shifts quietly. Hiking had become her way to reset. After work, she often drove to nearby trails, preferring the rhythm of steady movement in solitude. Friends and co-workers described her as cautious in daily life, but less attentive outdoors, usually carrying little more than water. She was not drawn to risk, but believed that familiar, well-traveled trails were safe. She had no sponsors or obligations. The hikes were personal, a way to balance routine with open space. The Hunchback Trail begins near Zigzag and climbs steeply before leveling along ridges with views toward Mount Hood. Though popular, the trail winds through dense forest where sightlines are short, and wildlife occasionally crosses paths with hikers. Mountain lions inhabit the region, elusive but capable of ambushing from cover. Standard advice for hikers includes carrying deterrents, avoiding earbuds, and traveling in groups. Attacks are rare, but when they occur, they unfold with sudden violence. On that Saturday, Claire signed into the trail register in the late morning, writing only her name. She set out at a steady pace, earbuds in, her water bottle strapped to her pack. Other hikers later recalled passing her as she climbed, moving alone, but not hurried. A couple ahead on the trail noticed her presence behind them at intervals, closing the gap slightly before pausing again. None of them saw the shadow that began to track her from the dense brush to the side. Several hikers reported hearing birds scatter suddenly, followed by silence. The couple in front remembered a sharp, human shriek breaking the quiet. When they turned, the scene was already in motion. A tawny mountain lion had leapt onto Claire from behind, its jaws locked onto her shoulders. She screamed and thrashed, her arms clawing at the dirt as the animal's weight forced her down. Her earbuds had been torn free, the cord dragging through the mud. The couple froze briefly before one of them grabbed rocks from the trail and hurled them toward the attack. The lion ignored the first strikes, tightening its grip as Claire kicked and tried to rise. Her movements weakened as the cat shifted its bite toward her neck, dragging her sideways toward the slope. The man threw again, one rock striking the lion's flank, but the animal did not release. With a sudden pull, it dragged her downslope into the brush, her cries cutting off seconds later. The forest returned to silence, but for the sound of running feet as hikers rushed to alert others. Rangers responding to emergency calls reached the site within the hour. They located her body about 20 yards downstream, concealed among ferns and broken branches. The injuries were consistent with predation, with clear bite marks along her neck and shoulders. Tracks surrounding the scene confirmed a single adult lion. The recovery team secured the area and escorted shaken hikers back to the trailhead. Claire's funeral was held in Salem, where co-workers, patients, and friends attended. Her dental clinic closed for the day in her memory. She was remembered for her calm patience with children and her quiet strength outside of work. Wildlife officials tracked the lion using dogs and motion cameras, locating it within 48 hours. The animal was euthanized, and new warnings were issued across the state's trail networks. Authorities emphasized the importance of hiking in groups, avoiding earbuds, and carrying deterrents in known lion habitats. It was July 22nd, 2017, in Death Valley National Park, California. By late morning, the desert floor shimmered under 115-degree heat, the air heavy and still. On the Golden Canyon Trail, A lone figure moved farther from the parking lot, determined to press on despite conditions that had already sent others back. Jenna Mendez, 27, worked as a graphic designer in Las Vegas. She was independent, stubbornly so, often taking unplanned road trips across the desert. Friends described her as someone who sought open spaces when work became overwhelming. She was not reckless in daily life, but she resisted being told what she could or could not do. Hiking in the desert appealed to her sense of self-sufficiency. Without sponsors or obligations, she had no outside pressures. Her challenges were personal, often framed as quiet tests of endurance. The Golden Canyon Trail is a popular route, winding through exposed rock formations with little shade. In summer, it becomes especially hazardous, with reflective walls trapping heat and raising ground-level temperatures well above the official readings. Rangers routinely warn against midday hikes during peak season, urging visitors to carry multiple liters of water and to start before sunrise. Jenna carried only a half-full bottle and no extra gear. Her clothing was light, but it offered little protection against relentless sun exposure. That morning, tourists leaving the canyon recalled seeing her begin the hike as others turned back. She walked with purpose, head high. Early along the trail, several hikers noted her flushed skin, but thought she seemed determined to continue. By late morning, a Belgian couple began the same route behind her. They saw her ahead, slowing on the incline as the path narrowed. As the couple gained ground, they saw her stumble, catching herself briefly before dropping to one knee. When they reached her, her face was red, her lips cracked. She insisted she was fine and waved them off, though her words were slurred. They offered her water, which she sipped weakly before standing again. She walked a few more yards, but her steps were unsteady. Moments later, she collapsed fully. Convulsions shook her limbs, her hands clawing briefly before going rigid. The couple knelt beside her, noting her skin was hot and dry rather than damp. They shaded her with a jacket and attempted to pour water onto her lips, but she was barely responsive. Her breathing became shallow, then ragged. As they dialed emergency services, she stopped moving, her chest rising only faintly. CPR was begun, compressions echoing in the silence of the canyon. Rangers arrived 20 minutes later, carrying medical gear. They recorded her body temperature as dangerously high, her pulse weak and irregular. Despite continued resuscitation attempts, she did not recover. She was declared dead on sight from heat stroke. Her remains transported back across the shimmering flats to Furnace Creek. Her funeral was held in Reno, where her parents lived. The service was small, attended by relatives and a handful of co-workers who remembered her for her quiet creativity and independence. Following her death, park officials added stronger warnings at trailheads, stressing the dangers of solo hiking during extreme temperatures. Signs in multiple languages urged visitors to avoid midday travel and to carry more water than they believed necessary. Rangers began patrolling popular trails more aggressively during heat advisories, encouraging early turnarounds before conditions became fatal. It was August 14th, 2015, in the Dolomites of northern Italy. The sky was mostly clear, but high ridges carried a restless wind that sent occasional dust and loose stones skittering down slopes. The cliffs above the Bocchette route held their usual silence, but the stability of their walls was never guaranteed. For those on the trail that morning, the beauty of the jagged towers came with risks that could shift in seconds. Anna Lang, 39, was a schoolteacher from Munich, spending her summer holiday in the Alps. She had always gravitated to mountains for their solitude and clarity, preferring to hike alone rather than in groups. Her friends and colleagues described her as careful and disciplined, someone who prepared well for her outings, but occasionally underestimated alpine hazards. For her, these trips were not athletic challenges, but ways to decompress from long school terms. Risk was not something she sought deliberately, though she accepted it as part of reaching the high landscapes she loved. The Bocchette route is via Ferrata, a protected climbing path common in the Dolomites. Steel cables and ladders allow hikers to traverse exposed cliffs with harnesses and carabiners. The system offers security against falls, but it does not protect against rockfall from above. Helmets are standard, and experienced climbers know not to linger beneath steep faces where debris can loosen. In late summer, freeze-thaw cycles and occasional storms leave cliffs unstable, and small dislodged stones are often precursors to larger collapses. That morning, Anna signed into the route and began moving steadily along the cables. Witnesses later noted she had the correct gear and clipped carefully, though she moved at a cautious pace. A Swiss group several minutes behind her observed that she paused often under high walls, looking out across the valleys rather than advancing quickly through exposed sections. They were aware of occasional trickles of gravel overhead, but continued, judging the conditions normal for August. As the route gained height, the trail narrowed to a traverse beneath a vertical face. The Swiss hikers saw her hesitate midway across, adjusting her carabiners with deliberate care. A sudden crack echoed above, sharp and unnatural. They looked upward to see a section of fractured rock beginning to shear off the cliff. Dust clouded instantly, and smaller fragments rained down ahead of the main fall. They shouted for her to move, but Anna looked up at the noise instead. A block the size of a backpack split loose, bouncing before striking her on the left shoulder. The blow spun her sideways off her stance. Though clipped to the cable, the force of the impact wrenched her body outward, slamming her against the wall. Her helmet shifted, and the harness straps twisted as she struck the cliff multiple times. Within seconds, her tether failed under extreme force. She tumbled out of sight, vanishing into the scree slope hundreds of feet below. The Swiss group froze, then scrambled to a safe alcove. Dust still drifted in the air, and fresh scars marked the rock face where the block had torn free. They could see her motionless form far below, sprawled on unstable stone. Attempts to descend were impossible on the steep terrain, so they alerted rescuers by phone. When Alpine rescue reached the slope hours later, they confirmed fatal injuries from both the initial impact and the subsequent fall. Her funeral was held in Munich, where colleagues and students filled the church with flowers and notes of remembrance. Many spoke of her patience in the classroom and her love of mountain holidays that she often described to her pupils. Italian authorities closed the Bocquet route for inspection. Engineers examined unstable sections and cleared debris before reopening several weeks later. Additional warnings were added at trailheads, reminding hikers not to pause beneath steep walls and to treat late summer conditions with heightened caution. It was March 12, 2016, at the cliffs of Moher in Western Ireland. The weather alternated between sun and mist, and sharp gusts swept in from the Atlantic. Tour buses unloaded visitors throughout the morning, but the edges of the cliffs remained exposed and unpredictable. The day would end in silence and shock when one step too close met the weakness of crumbling ground. Rachel Parrish, 22, was a university student from Cork studying media and communications. Friends described her as outgoing, eager to document her life in photos and share them with classmates. She often sought dramatic scenery, combining her interest in photography with weekend trips to Ireland's coasts. She was ambitious and sometimes impulsive, driven by a desire to capture images that felt larger than her routine life. Risk was not her focus, but she was known to take chances with positioning herself close to edges to get the shot she wanted. The cliffs of Moher are among the most visited natural sights in Ireland, rising over 700 feet above the Atlantic. The terrain is composed of layered shale and sandstone, subject to erosion from constant wind and rain. While sections are fenced, many areas remain open, with grass leading right to unstable ledges. On that morning, Rachel arrived carrying her phone and a small tripod. Witnesses later noted that she set up shots near the paths, but gradually edged closer to unprotected ground. The wind was strong enough to force people to brace themselves, yet she appeared intent on capturing the sea backdrop behind her. Several tourists saw her crouch and adjust her phone, stepping back toward the drop as she aligned herself in the frame. Conditions grew more hazardous as sudden gusts swept over the rim. A pair of German tourists walking nearby noticed Rachel positioning herself near an overhang of damp turf. They hesitated, sensing the danger, but she seemed focused on her device. Others passed quickly, choosing not to linger near the edge in the shifting wind. Without warning, the ground beneath her gave way. The grass and soil split with a muffled crack, and a section of the ledge separated from the main cliff. Rachel let out a piercing scream as the earth dropped beneath her feet. Her body pitched forward into open space, falling hundreds of feet straight into the waves below. The German couple shouted for help, drawing attention from nearby visitors. People rushed to the area, some peering over the rim, but the distance and ocean swell made rescue impossible. Emergency services were called immediately, and the area was cordoned off while Coast Guard helicopters searched below. Recovery efforts were delayed by rough seas, with her body located later that evening. Her funeral in Cork was held quietly, attended by classmates, family, and neighbors, in disbelief at the sudden loss. Irish authorities reviewed the incident in their safety reports and installed additional barriers and warning signs in popular sections of the cliffs. They emphasized that unstable ground made it impossible to guarantee safety near edges, urging visitors to remain on established paths. It was October 21st, 2017, in Banff National Park, Alberta. The morning began with scattered clouds and crisp autumn air, drawing dozens of hikers to the popular trails. By midday, a wall of weather from the west would transform the landscape, turning open paths into whiteout conditions, eventually cutting a life short. Marie Dangle, 30 years old, was a French exchange student living in Calgary. She was studying environmental science and drawn to the Canadian Rockies, both for research and personal escape. Friends described her as independent, sometimes to the point of stubbornness, determined to prove she could handle challenges without relying on others. Hiking alone was her habit, and she often posted photos from summits with captions about testing herself. Risk, for her, was not sought recklessly, but accepted as proof of resilience. The Plain of Six Glaciers Trail is a well-known route that begins gently, but climbs into exposed alpine terrain. At higher elevations, the path runs along open slopes where wind can accelerate and snow accumulates quickly. Standard preparation includes insulated layers, waterproof gear, and emergency supplies. But Marie carried only a fleece jacket, a light day pack, and a small amount of food and water. That day, forecasts warned of snow moving in by early afternoon. Many hikers chose shorter routes or turned back early. Marie signed the trail register and proceeded uphill, smiling at others she passed. Witnesses later recalled seeing her at the overlook above Lake Louise, pausing to take in the view even as gray clouds thickened on the horizon. By then, wind gusts carried sleet, and visibility was dropping. As she pressed higher, conditions worsened rapidly. Snow began to fall in heavy sheets, covering the trail and obscuring landmarks. A group descending urged her to head down with them, but she shook her head and continued alone. The decision placed her further into exposure just as the storm arrived in full force. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had plummeted and the path was buried under drifts. A father and his teenage son, retreating quickly down the trail, spotted movement through the blowing snow. It was Marie, crouched low against the wind, her hands bare and trembling. She was shivering violently, her face pale beneath wind-stung skin. She raised an arm weakly toward them before collapsing sideways into the snow. The two rushed over, trying to shield her with their jackets. They attempted to lift her, dragging her in the direction of the tree line, but the blizzard intensified, limiting their progress to a crawl. Marie's movements slowed despite their efforts. Her body became rigid with cold, her breaths shallow and erratic. The father tried to keep her conscious, rubbing her arms and covering her torso with his pack. But within minutes, her eyes closed and her chest stilled. They continued dragging her, hoping for shelter, but she no longer responded. By the time rescuers located them hours later, guided by coordinates relayed through spotty phone reception, she showed no pulse. Her skin had turned bluish, and exposure had claimed her before aid could reach the scene. Her funeral was held in Lyon after her parents arranged for her body to be flown home. Former classmates, professors, and relatives gathered, remembering her as adventurous and determined, her absence leaving a sharp void. Parks Canada issued an incident report, urging hikers to treat October in the Rockies as full winter conditions. Advisories were updated to stress the need for insulated clothing, survival gear, and avoiding solo travel during shifting weather patterns, even on well-known trails. It was June 14, 2015, in South Mountain Park on the southern edge of Phoenix. The sun had dropped low, staining the desert in deep orange light, while shadows stretched across rocky washes. Evening hikers moved quietly through the fading heat, unaware that one of them would soon not return home. Teresa Valdez, 41, worked as a paralegal at a mid-sized Phoenix firm. She balanced long office hours with raising 2 children, carving out time for evening hikes as a way to clear her mind. Friends described her as disciplined and orderly, but hiking was her one indulgence, a place where structure gave way to quiet solitude. She rarely took risks knowingly, but she also did not overthink hazards, assuming her familiarity with the desert meant she could manage them. South Mountain Park is crisscrossed with trails that pass through open desert, washes, and rocky ridges. In June, the terrain remains hot long after sunset, and wildlife becomes more active as temperatures drop. Rattlesnakes, common in the area, often settle among rocks or along washes in the evening. Most hikers wear boots and keep to marked paths, but Teresa had on shorts and running shoes, light clothing better suited for exercise than for protection against hazards. That evening, warnings about snake activity had been posted at several trailheads. Some hikers decided to turn back early after spotting a few rattlers sunning near the rocks. Teresa, however, signed in at the kiosk and pressed forward. She chose a quieter route, turning onto a rocky wash where the trail faded into loose gravel. The path was shaded, cooler than the open ridges, but also more concealed. Other hikers later reported seeing her crouch to tie her shoe, unaware of what lay just beside her foot. As she leaned down, a sharp cry cut the stillness. A family walking nearby turned in time to see Teresa jerk backward, clutching her calf. In the rocks, a coiled rattlesnake struck again, lashing forward with speed. The second bite landed higher on her leg before the snake slipped back between stones. Teresa staggered upright, her face tight with shock, and tried to hobble away from the spot. Within moments, symptoms began to overwhelm her. She broke into heavy sweats despite the cooling air, her skin flushing and then paling. She vomited, fell to one knee, and then collapsed fully onto the gravel. The family rushed to her side, calling emergency services while trying to calm her. They noticed the swelling spread rapidly from the bite upward, her leg ballooning grotesquely. She clutched at her stomach and gasped for air, her lips beginning to discolor. For 20 minutes, they tried to keep her awake, shading her with a jacket and pressing cloth against her forehead. The trail's rough terrain slowed paramedic access, forcing rescuers to approach on foot with equipment. By the time they arrived, Teresa's body had gone limp. Her breathing had stopped, and despite attempts at resuscitation, she showed no response. Rangers later identified bite marks consistent with a western diamondback rattlesnake, the venom likely overwhelming her system before antivenom could be administered. Her funeral in Phoenix drew co-workers, extended family, and dozens of neighbors. Her children attended in tears, her absence felt most strongly among them. In the weeks following, city officials coordinated with park staff to launch a snake safety awareness campaign. Signs warning about summer snake activity were added at major trailheads, advising hikers to wear protective clothing, remain on established paths, and avoid hiking alone at twilight. Thanks for watching. If these series of lone decisions turning into a death trap entertained you, click here for more.